I will briefly introduce Georgia as a country. It's an Eastern European country located on the Black Sea. Now, we have four neighboring countries. It's Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia. It used to be a part of the Soviet Union, and has reinstated its independence in 1991. Over 80% of our population is supporting Georgia's membership of the European Union, so that Georgia joins the EU eventually. In 2022, after the Russia's full invasion of Ukraine, we, alongside with Ukraine and Moldova, have applied for EU's membership. And yes, so far we have a visa-free regime with the European Union member states, so 27 countries. Yeah, and in December of 2023, we were given a candidate status.
Mhm.
So right now we are an EU membership candidate country, even though right now the status is being jeopardized, and I will explain by what exactly. I mean, we have a basically authoritarian oligarchic government, which has been in power since 2012. Um, in spring of 2023, they introduced the so-called foreign agent law, according to which basically any civil society organization that would receive more than 20% of its funding from abroad should be declared as a foreign agent and
Mhm.
registered in a special registry. So that's something very analogous to what happened in Russia and in some other authoritarian states. And this places a huge stigma on CSOs. I here will also explain that Georgia is like a transit country
Mhm.
between, let's say, Europe and Asia and the Middle East and so on, but it doesn't have a lot of natural resources. We also don't have a lot of industry. So basically, what we live on as economically is remittances from our migrants from abroad and from the Western countries mainly at this point. It's
Mhm.
um, it's a bit of income from tourism, which is very unstable because we have a, let's say, a bad neighborhood, and we had the war in 2008. Russians attacked us, and of course, any kind of such attack, any kind of such assault affects tourism immediately, or even
Mhm.
like a lighter protest movements and some things. So this is very unstable income, obviously, that is related to tourism. And then it's basically Western assistance, like foreign aid, be that in grants or in loans for the government. So these are basically all the, as I've said, the sources of our economy and pillars of our economy and sources of our
Mhm.
income. And in this situation, when you declare, so therefore CSOs also mainly receive its funding from abroad because population is pretty poor. And, unlike, let's say, the US, where you have a big donating culture, like private businesses are donating to different nonprofits, here this is not really the case. um, Neither individuals nor businesses mostly don't donate to CSOs, to NGOs, and the largest portion of, let's say, civil society income here is coming from abroad, especially when it comes to CSOs working on anti-corruption issues, on electoral transparency, on rule of law, judicial reform, also like gender equality and women's rights, and some also disability rights. I mean, m- environmental protection, watchdogging, like investigative journalism, independent media, all it comes from abroad. And therefore, it was really to place a huge stigma on this big sector. And then it was withdrawn due to the protests in spring of 2023. But this year, they reintroduced this bill and they passed it despite, again, the major protests, again, despite warnings from the West. Um, So this is how this whole, let's say, downfall of our democracy, I would say, not started. I would say it speeded up because it's been. I mean, when you have a government that gets reelected for, let's say, 3 terms consecutively, of course, they have a lot of temptation of basically capturing the state.
mm,
And when so, anyways, to bring come to a point, when this law was again reinstated, the disability community, of course, also is going to be affected and is affected. And we stood up against this bill, this law, and we issued public statements and we started talking publicly against this law. And
mhm,
the pro government media really portrayed us as like victims, as misled, poor disabled people who don't know what they are protesting against,
mhm,
what they are signing, what they are doing, anyways. And yeah, so they really tried to portray us as these helpless victims. So this is what I wanted to say, that when it comes to disability community around the world, it's usually not so violently persecuted for dissenting opinions, but it's more threatened with, for example, deprivation of social services, of
mhm,
deprivation of assistive devices, because our disability community is largest minority in the world and the poorest minority in the world, as we often say. And we depend largely on the state services. For example, I don't know, wheelchairs, hearing aids, white canes, and all other things. I don't know, funding of treatment and some other things. So people are really afraid that they will lose this, or they won't be provided the wheelchair on time, which basically means that they are going to be confined in their homes, and or they would be fired from the jobs. And in Georgia, it's more an exception than a rule when a disabled person is able to work. Like, and gets a job, because yeah, due to discrimination and
mhm,
inaccessible environment and so on, yeah, we, yeah, are massively unemployed. And so in this situation, when the community started, so as I've said, it's usually not direct violence that is being used against us, but it's this these threats and these intimidations. But
mhm,
it's not good. It's just that we are not seen as a threat. We are not seen as a power. Therefore,
mhm,
yeah, as a power carrier, we are seen as weak, whom could be easily subjugated by, let's say, these like threats, or um, very often just like self-censorship as well. And also, yeah, so it was very easy for the media, for the pro-government media, to portray us as like victims, as people who have been used, so basically as objects. And I mean, it's obviously a violation of like journalistic, let's say, principles of ethics. uh,
mhm,
and we complained to the self-regulatory body, and they said that yes, like the ethics principles of like ethical journalism were violated.
mhm,
But of course, and we continued being present on the demonstrations. We sent these our joint statements around to different international organizations. But I
mhm,
have to say that we have to fight on many fronts, unlike, let's say, our non-disabled peers, because, of course, we are, fighting the government and so on. At the same time, we have to fight for our place within the civil society. Very often, when, like, let's say, member like European politicians visit Georgia to inquire on the situation around this foreign agents law or around the elections, we are not invited as civil society representatives usually. And the same happened when the high-level anti-corruption official from the US came again. They met with a lot of representatives from Georgian civil society, but there was nobody from disability community. And
mhm,
persists. This persists, unfortunately. Okay, then we had parliamentary elections on October the 26th of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we've seen mass falsification of these elections. And obviously, disabled voters were also affected. Even the secrecy of the ballot was violated because this year we had this semi-electronic elections
Mm.
where you would circle the candidate whom you wanted to vote for, but then you would have to put the ballot into the special machine that would automatically count the votes after the polling stations closed down. And
Mm-hmm.
what that meant is that you would not put this ballot into the envelope in the voting booth. You would just have to get out of the voting booth in the let's say common area of the polling
Okay.
station and just put this ballot into the machine. And yes, you could turn the ballot upside down so that it's not visible, like whom you circled, but it was they used such a markers and such a paper that basically this paint went through the paper, and
Okay.
any person who would look over your shoulder pretty much could see or could easily guess whom you voted for. And there were a lot of cameras installed by the ruling party. They had the legal right to do so. The excuse was to observe the voting process, but it was really, as I've said, intrusion into the who people voted for. And of course, this affected very much and intimidated uh, people who had different vulnerabilities,
Of
be that
course.
civil servants, especially in the countryside, where people rely on the state for employment. I would have to say that in Georgia, the state is the largest employer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean only like bureaucrats, but also, for example, school teachers, kindergarten teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and other similar professions. And these people, and also disabled people, I mean, everybody was intimidated with this. And also, the problem was that civil society representatives were telling everyone that the vote will be secret and no one will know whom you voted for. But it turned out that it was possible to actually know who somebody voted for, and this created a lot of fear, and this contributed to intimidation and mass falsification of these elections. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I mean, imagine when you are blind and you don't even know if like your ballot is secret or not, and like who could see it or who could not see it.
Mm-hmm.
If you, let's say, were going there alone to the polling station without I don't know, somebody whom you trust, it was let's say impossible, and it affected us disproportionately. And also we had situations where investigative journalists found out that some disabled people's ID cards were taken away before the voting
Mm-hmm.
day, so that they would not be able to go and vote, because I guess local authorities knew that these people were this family was against the ruling party, and they were not sure that they would vote for the ruling party, so they just took their ID cards away. And
That's horrible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the reason why the point I'm trying to make is that disability community is affected, no, if not more, but no less than everyone else, with the um, non-democratic tendencies in the country. And But again, like civil society started big protests against the rigged elections, and
Mm-hmm.
protests were really fueled by our prime minister's statement that he made, let's say, about 3 weeks ago, on November the 28th, that Georgia will postpone its efforts to join the European Union till 2028.
mhm,
And that was a red flag for many people, even for those who voted for the Georgian Dream, the ruling party, because their initial promise was that we will keep going towards Europe. Like their slogan was towards Europe with dignity, and suddenly
mhm.
say that we are postponing all the EU integration efforts for basically the whole term of this parliament. And that's again sparked mass protests, and
Mhm,
there's a lot of police brutality going on. There are mass arrests. People are massively beaten up. Um,
mhm,
Protests are very peaceful to a point where, unlike many European states where, I don't know, stores are broken, like here,
mhm.
I mean, not one store was broken, not one glass was broken. And the police and the special forces, yeah, using basically disproportionate, let's say, force, and they use this tear gas, which is on the verge of a chemical weapon because people get very poisoned.
Yes.
It
Uh-huh.
damaging for the eyes, and there are doctors that say that this is very poisonous and very harmful gas actually. When
Mhm,
people are beaten up, I mean unarmed people are beaten up in their heads, and this is again, this can cause long-term injuries like brain injuries. It's all very dangerous. People are charged with severe fines. And actually, three deaf persons were also beaten up and detained. The protesters.
This, the, you can continue. I'm very impressed. Please.
Yes, yes. So, and when we actually started sharing information about these people, somebody wrote that, well, what did the deaf person need on the street 5 o'clock in the morning? Where were their guardians? So again,
Mhm,
we as people with disabilities are viewed as objects that should be taken care of, that, shouldn't be independent and should not have their voice, and
mhm,
shouldn't have therefore dissenting opinion. So this societal prejudice is complementing, unfortunately, the government mass repressions,
mhm,
and therefore, again, for disabled people is the double burden. Maybe also. Many of you know that 3rd of December is International Day of Persons or the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And
mhm,
as a part of the protests, people have come to the public broadcaster, the channel that
mhm,
is funded from the state budget, and demanded a time on air where they could go and just express and like talk about what's going on, how many people are being repressed, how many unlawful searches happen. I mean, police breaks into people's homes without let's say, court orders regarding the search, because legally this is how the search should be done. There has to be
mhm,
a court order, there have to be witnesses attending, and they don't follow these procedures. They just break into your house and demand that you open the door and just search and take everything, like laptops, tablets, I don't know, arbitrarily, very often. Um, and sometimes don't even return them back eventually, which is basically a robbery. Um,
mhm,
um, so these people demanded time on air, and they pressured the director of the public broadcaster to allocate at least an hour a day for civil society representatives to just come over and talk about what's going on, with the protests. And on December the 3rd, because it's a day of persons with disabilities, we wanted to go there as a disability community and speak about how these repressions affect us. And
mhm,
because also we had a case when many civil servants are expressing public protest against this prime minister's statement, and
Mm-hmm.
they, support Georgia's EU integration. And amongst them, there are disabled civil servants, and all of them together are threatened that they will be fired from, they will be losing their job. There will be, let's say, reorganization of this, of the like institution where they work, and they will be all fired. And we wanted to talk about this, and we were told by the organizers, who were civil society representatives, we were told, well, listen, let's avoid, we don't need positive discrimination. So let's have two people, two respondents from civil society and two respondents from disability community. So they divided, can you imagine, they differentiate between us and civil society. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't mention us as like civil society representatives, which was one big shock. And then the other shock was that, mm, this positive discrimination thing. Like, yes, maybe it would be unfair that only disabled people speak out on TV, let's say, if every day in every other topic, be that Georgia's EU integration, foreign policy, security, economy, education reform, um, then it would make, if in all of these discussions every day around the year we would have disabled respondents talking, then it would make a lot of sense that yes, let's not have only disabled speakers on the 3rd of December. But when that's the only day when actually disabled people are talking and like are respondents on TV, then I think it doesn't make sense to call this a positive discrimination. So what I'm saying is that unfortunately, in this fight, we have to fight again against the government, but also we have to fight for our place in civil society. We have to fight for our voice to be heard by the international community, by donor community, by different embassies, and also within disability community. Obviously, it's divided. We have a lot of pro-government disabled people. Some of them are forced to be so because they depend on the services and are afraid, and don't have the privilege to be more independent. Some of them are, let's say, ideologically on the side of the state, and it's very hard. Anyways, it's a big intersectional challenge for us to be, because we, again, on the one hand, we have to try to work with the disability community to raise their awareness. This spring, the deaf community did not even know what this foreign agent law was about, because not
Mm-hmm.
so much, most of the TV content, most of the media content is not translated into sign language. Most of it doesn't have subtitles. So they don't, like, physically don't have information. And we have to, educate people, have to pass this information on. And again, while at the same time, again, fighting the government, pushing the civil society, pushing the donors. And of course, when plus you are young and female in the patriarchal society, which this country definitely is, it brings a lot of, let's say, extra layers of challenge and pressure. So I think I should stop here, and otherwise, I'm ready maybe to hear questions from you, Rodrigo, or from your audience.
Oh, thank you, Esma. Thank you very, very, very much for this big lecture. In the world, we need people like you. You need people that are connected to the reality and willing to change. One important question that we have to address in this conversation, because we were having conversation in Salzburg, and you and Chisholm, you started saying about the use of people, disabled people, and people with disabilities. Can you explain to us a little bit
Mhm, mhm.
about the terms that it might be used and why,
Mhm.
please?
Yes, sure. So, yes, I used both terms interchangeably, I guess, in this talk. There are two approaches. There is this the major treaty, which is basically like disability constitution around the world, let's say, which is called the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was
Mm-hmm.
adopted in 2006 and came into force in 2008. And Georgia has ratified it in 2014, which means that it's part of our law right now. This convention uses, and over 170 countries have ratified it, so that we know that it's a really global, um, legal
Mm-hmm.
document. It uses person's first language, so we, according to the ideology of the convention, you should be putting emphasis on a person and then on a disability, and this is why this convention is using term of person with disabilities.
Okay.
And therefore person with blindness, person with deafness, person with intellectual and psychosocial needs. um, that's their reasoning. There are a bunch of global and regional organizations that instead prefer using term disabled, because they think that it expresses better this social model, social approach to disability, which is that we are not disabled because of our individual characteristics of certain diagnoses, but we're disabled by the society, by the lack of accessible infrastructure, by the attitudes, absence of assistive devices and services. And this is why these organizations use term disabled persons or disabled by the environment. So the disability is not like an individual characteristic or individual fault or burden of a person, but it's something that a society imposes on you. So it disables you by its actions or omissions. So that's pretty much the difference.
That's really interesting because you said that Georgia ratified the convention on 2014, but everything that you've been showing to us right now, that's the lack of representativeness of the people with disabilities in Georgia, right? Because you are not listened,
Mhm.
you are not came brought to the
Yeah.
discussion of
Mhm.
what is happening, what is needs to change. Do you think there is
Mhm.
like a controversy between the what the government says and what is it really doing in Georgia?
Mhm. Yes, I mean, like right now, there's less and less controversy, like, or at least, less and less disparity between what the government is saying or doing on a general
Mhm.
level, because again, they directly are saying now that we don't want to join the EU, basically. Well, now, as a result of mass protest, they say that we don't say this. They denied. They didn't say that. That
Mhm.
they now say that they are misinterpreted and so on. But when we talk about like disability more specifically, of course, yes, the government boasts a lot about what they have done in terms of disability, that it's their party that ratified the convention, it's their party that ratified the additional protocol, which gives us possibility to submit individual complaints to the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which oversees the let's say, enforcement of this convention around the world. So we can
Mhm.
use it as a court and basically submit complaints there. The ruling party has a disabled member of parliament,
Mhm.
but of course, in this situation, and also there's a lot of pressure on a lot of expectations of him that he should be representing the community. But the thing is, as we're not only disabled people, right? We have a lot of other hats and identities. So in this situation, it's not that he is disabled that matters. What matters is
Mm-hmm.
that he is in the ruling party. He's a member of parliament. He's a chairman of one of the committees. I don't remember. I think it's either human rights or legal affairs committee. I'm not sure. So he's a high level official there. So he's gonna do whatever his party is gonna say. That's what he's gonna prioritize over, let's say, the disability community's demands. And
Mm-hmm.
this is why, and it's very natural, and but a lot of people are disproportionately disappointed by his, you know, um, let's say, conformism, and his that he only advertises the government. But this is, again, this is normal. This is part uh, of how things are. What should be done instead is that the opposition also should have disabled politicians,
Mm-hmm.
because it's then it will be possible to have an equal debate with him, because today, today there are no election, there is no parliament. Basically, there is no, the opposition completely withdrew from the parliament because they don't recognize the elections. But
Mm-hmm.
let's say up till the October 26th, the situation was that if opposition, whenever tried to challenge him and government's disability policy, that things are not being getting done and so on, these disabled member of parliament would get out and say, who are you to talk to me about this? You are not a member of community. You are not to be bossing me around. I have a direct connections with the community. And
Mm-hmm.
if there was a disabled opposition leader or politician, then it would be possible for this politician to debate with him, because he would say, well, look, I also have a disability, and I also, have this identity, and I also have connection with disability community, and I'm saying, and this is what research shows, and this is what the evidence shows, that these things are, that you're not doing what you're supposed to do, and you're not fulfilling your obligations, and
Mm-hmm.
so on and so forth. So yeah, I think this is the only way how the government disability policy could be effectively challenged.
Oh, Esma, this is very good. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask you a little bit as well. How do societal attitudes towards disability impacts inclusion efforts, and what progress have you seen in recent years?
Yes, of course, as I've already talked about, some barriers that we have when we participate in demonstrations. For example, like, we sometimes need, someone to accompany us to a demonstration, and people are afraid because they say, what if something happens at this demonstration? Then it's like our responsibility, and they are afraid of this responsibility, that they would have to take us out somehow. Um, but yeah, I mean, the attitudes
Especially in
have.
the context of Georgia, for example.
Yes, yes, of course. I mean, that's I'm talking about Georgia right now.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, so the public attitudes have changed. I mean, when I was a child, and I'm blind from birth, so when I was a child, a lot of people, like when my mother and I would be on the public transport, a lot of people would, let's say, pity us, and express this pity publicly, and say, oh my god, poor you, and something. Today it's less that way. We are much less intruded like this, but the awareness is still very low. Like when I'm moving around the city independently, when I don't have, like, unaccompanied, again, like, I'm often grabbed by random people who don't even ask if I need help, or if I don't, or like how they are supposed to help me if I need this help. So yeah, this is another thing that I would say. um yeah, these attitudes are changing gradually. Also, it used to be maybe like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I joined university. I didn't see a lot of disabled people talking about politics. Today, I see a lot of disabled, well, not a lot, but at least few disabled people uh, writing posts about politics and writing in chats about politics and discussing all of these things. So definitely some change is happening, but it's rather slow. And again, when I've told you already about how we have to fight
Mm-hmm.
for our place within the civil society, within the people who are most progressive. I mean, people who work on human rights, on gender equality, on women's rights. It's very hard, and it was very hard for disabled women to explain to the women's rights movement that we actually also have a stake in the women's rights, because yeah, we're not only disabled, but we are also women, and we confront all these gender stereotypes, all these beauty and appearance stereotypes. We also have issues with the sexual and reproductive health and rights, and even more so than non-disabled women. So yeah, yeah.
Esma, that's really, really interesting, especially the part that you said that you have to fight against people that are already working with human rights. So
Mhm.
there are stakes on the organizations. They need to work actively to have your voice heard, and having these discussions challenge to change, to real change. And how do you think that the presence of Russia in affected the daily lives, especially of people with disabilities in Georgia?
Yeah. Well, so obviously those persons with disabilities who live on the occupied territories. I mean, we cannot really reach them because this is beyond the Georgian control, and also Georgian citizens cannot go there and cannot do any projects there and cannot
Mm-hmm.
simply travel there. So we cannot really spread the information. We cannot really um,
Mm-hmm.
influence
Okay.
and improve their situation very much unless they come to Georgian proper territory somehow. And of course, for them, it's harder to go through all these, let's say, illegitimate border. It's not a border, but it's basically these occupational force control. Through all these administrative border, what is called.
Mm-hmm.
And once they do, then they can use services that are offered in Georgia. But again, of course, they're more affected because there is no, for example, inclusive education there. So like blind people are forced to study on the Georgia proper territory in a
Mm-hmm.
specialized school only, which means that and for them it's harder again to go back home. So for example, when other kids from a boarding school go to their homes, or for the weekend, um, these youngsters from occupied territories have to stay in a boarding school over the weekend and
Okay.
sometimes over the breaks because it's hard to get home and then it's harder to get back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, otherwise, of course, like military presence of Russia in our um, proximity, basically there is Russian military like half an hour away from Tbilisi,
Mm-hmm.
on the occupied territories. Of course, I mean, there is always this threat of the war, and especially when the full-scale war started in Ukraine, we were very afraid for our safety because there was a lot of talk that Kiev might fall in 3 days or a week or so, and we knew that we would be next, let's say, target of Russia. And I mean, when you're disabled, it's like there are no like accessible bunkers.
Mm-hmm.
There is like we really didn't know, for example, where and how would we run. And of course, those who of us who have families, yeah, would be dependent on the family members to live somewhere or to flee or whatnot. But those who don't and who live alone, and many disabled people do live alone because they don't
Mm-hmm.
create families due to social stigma. Let's say much less people are willing to marry them, for example. So that means that we have more chances of actually being alone, even against our choice, not only with our choice. So for those people, obviously, it would be much harder to cope with this kind of situation. And of course, because Russia is against Georgia's EU integration. Of course, that affects us as disabled people because the Europe right now is the most inclusive society in the world, and it's the or you have a lot of you have disabled members of European Parliament, you have disabled politicians in European countries, including those who have intellectual and psychosocial disabilities, which is unprecedented, I would say, around the world. So that
Hmm.
is the most accepting society. And if we are deprived of a possibility to integrate there, of course, it's going to affect disability community greatly. And there is a lot of talk about how, disabled people are afraid that if we say no to the EU, we might return again back to the era when there were like big institutions for homeless disabled people. And, the state would say that it's going to be much easier for us to put these people in these institutions like segregated settings rather than making the whole cities and whole environment accessible and help including these people everywhere. So yeah, of course it affects us.
Thank you very much. Or Esma, I would like you, if you can delve deep into this subject as well, because you said that being a woman and being a person with disability, if you feel comfortable talking about it, or if you would as well, if you could share some success stories or achievements that you're most proud of from your work in advocacy. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. I will start with the success stories. So, or maybe I will end with them to end on a positive note. So, yeah. So when you're disabled and you are a woman, of course you are subjected to all the expectation. Like you're subjected to double pity, because you are viewed. I was personally told by some of my neighbors, some of my relatives, and like I was overhearing people saying like, oh, it's so sad, it's such a shame that like she's blind, she's so pretty. So meaning basically that I was not blind, I would be able to get married, because again, in this patriarchal society where the most important missions of a woman is to, or let's say one of the few ways of for a woman to be self-realized and happy is to get married and have kids. Obviously, again, because when you're disabled, you're looked down upon and nobody really wants to marry you. Well, I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but I'm talking about the masses and the majority situation. I mean, obviously, that means that you are sort of deprived uh, of this, let's say, most important missions that a woman has to fulfill. So, you are not going to be able to fulfill your mission as a mother, and so on. So, this causes, on the one hand, a pity, and also it causes invalidation of you, because a lot of times I have seen how like civil activists, how female politicians were evaluated based on how good mothers they are, how good wives they are, and like based on their personal lives. Of course, this in this situation, if you don't have family and you are a woman, and you are trying to be politically active, that's a big minus for you. It's not, you are not respected enough because you don't have this family. And so it's and on the other hand, in terms of like sexual violence, on the one hand, there is more chances of disabled women to experience it, especially in the regions, especially for women who have intellectual and psychosocial disabilities or are dependent on their family members. Unfortunately, very often this kind of violence is perpetrated by close relatives and family members. So it's either this kind of violence, or on the other hand, a lot of let's say, progressive and educated men are afraid of having any relationship with a disabled woman because they are afraid of like this responsibility, that they would be blamed for something, for quote unquote using this woman. So it's either or situation, and it affects us greatly. And of course, also, for example, things like healthcare, which healthcare facilities are not accessible, especially for people with physical disabilities, and including gynecological services, yeah, which are mostly needed by women. And also like things like confidentiality when you go to a doctor, usually, and you're disabled, usually doctors try to talk to somebody who's accompanying you, either a family member or friend or whoever that might be. And of course, like when you are a woman and you may not want your family members to know some details
Mm-hmm.
of your life, then it's even harder because, again, you have to pressure the doctors to uh, and your family members to leave the room, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are like very, very simple, and I try to be very specific on examples how and like in numbers, out of 49,000 women who have officially disability status. This is not new. It's like 5 years ago was this data. It was 5 years ago research, but I don't think the reality has changed greatly. So out of these 49,000 women, only 42 disabled women went and requested like a planned preventive medical consultations. So not emergency, not something that, let's say, you need an urgent attention, but just to go and do a regular checkup. So it was 1 in 1,000 women, basically, for in a year. And we have state-funded healthcare, or at least co-paid by the state. So for many women with disabilities, it's free of charge. But again, only 1 out of 1,000 actually went and did this planned consultations.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many reasons for this, not only gender-based ones, but also because a lot of times, especially out of the major cities, the medical facilities can be far away, and uh, like public transport, especially outside the major cities, is not accessible. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's very hard for disabled people to actually go to medical facilities, and these facilities often don't have elevators or ramps, or these ramps are completely inappropriate. So, and they largely depend on their family members to be transported there. So it's all kinds of issues. Yeah, when
Esma,
we
that's really really insightful. I don't know if you have the idea on how you are clarifying and being so thoughtful in spaces that I don't think normally about it, because
Mhm.
I don't feel the suffers that the difficulties that you suffer
Right.
like in the daily basis.
Right. I mean, this is why we have these discussions to exchange knowledge and information. And yeah, and when it comes to successes of my advocacy, for example, me and few other blind people were advocating for the copyright laws to be amended in a way that blind people, but also people with dyslexia, so those who cannot read printed text with their eyes, have
Mm,
access to electronic books, or like for especially for screen readers, for example, the screen readers that read to the blind people, yeah, the
mhm,
content. Like it's possible to read only a Word format text, but also PDF, HTML, which is not scanned. So we
mhm,
cannot make our screen readers read the scanned documents or books. And this is why we need Word versions of textbooks, or I don't know, pleasure books, and
Mm-hmm.
the publishers would not give these to us because they would be afraid that we would, I don't know, print it out or give it to other people, and that was considered an infringement on their copyrights.
Mm-hmm.
And these laws were amended in a way that now, if you are a blind person and you need access to a book, you should be given the access to the book in a format that you need. And so Georgia has ratified the so-called Marrakesh Treaty, which is also about these copyright laws. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is very important for our university students, especially who need, constant access to textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one law, and the other one concerns signatures. So it used to be that the blind persons were not allowed to sign the documents independently. They had to entrust their signature to, let's say, a third party, someone who
Mm-hmm.
would sign on their behalf, because, well, it was considered that we are not able to, read the document.
Mm-hmm.
And the law basically did not recognize any alternative ways of reading rather than reading a hard copy by your own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't envision any screen readers, any assistive devices or technologies. And this law, it was we lobbied heavily for amendments in the civil code. And now it's amended in a way that blind persons can sign documents on their own, can get their stamp certified and use the
Mm-hmm.
stamp to sign the documents. And yeah, I mean, that's about civil liberties, really, that we don't need anyone to, sign our own documents.
That's really, really good, Esma. And for a little, we are getting to the end. And for in what advice should you give to young advocates, to those inspiring to work in this field and to be as powerful as you are?
I think focus on the moment, try to achieve little victories. Try with something small. I started with self-advocacy, so I entered university. There was no accessibility there, and I just started demanding for myself, that I need this, I need that, and it's if you don't provide this, it's discrimination. And some things, I mean, sometimes I demanded, sometimes I asked, but the point was, later I just started describing my journey because people were interested. Oh, how are you studying at the university? How are you traveling abroad? How are you? And I just started sharing this, and this is how it started. But then, of course, I did more reading. I read the laws, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and I would also suggest this to other like young activists. That, of course, it's good to start with your own experiences, but then also share and start sharing your own experiences. Then that's the next step of advocacy, because by sharing you empower others, you show others that there is a way. And when I started sharing, then I started receiving phone calls and messages that, hey, I've entered university, what can you suggest me, how should I proceed? And giving this kind of advice, but then do a lot of reading and learning about the laws that exist in your countries, human rights treaties, also like research reports. Educate yourself on other human rights issues, because and then you will be able to express solidarity to other groups, and then ask them for reciprocity. Ask them to show you a solidarity when you need it. But you cannot ask others for this unless you do the same. As you get involved in, I don't know, be that climate justice, be that judicial reform, like wider issues, not only, let's say, disability. And just remember that, yeah, I mean, you are citizens, so you cannot be concerned only by, I don't know, accessible transport or something. You have to be concerned by other things that affect other people as well. Because, I mean, for example, like labor rights, even if you are not employed, like your personal assistants might be employed, your family members might be employed, and yeah, so it's I that's what I would say. and just try to not think too much about the future, because sometimes it's not super promising, but just try to do what you can do now, and affect where you can make a difference, and where you could matter.
Esma, you have no idea on how insightful and clarifying. I feel another person. I feel like how the world needs to be. We know what to do, and we can start doing right now, right? So I wish you a very happy end of the weekend, a very happy weekend.
Mhm.
And thank you very much for being here. I will tag you your social media, and if everyone that watching needs to clarify anything, you can talk to her. And thank you very much, Esma, for the opportunity and for hearing this lecture, magnificent lecture you gave us today. Thank you very
Mhm.
much.
No problem. Thank you, Rodrigo, for giving me this platform. And yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to reach out to me, maybe you can post my email address, or yeah, it's completely public. So
Uh,
I hope it was useful for someone, and yeah, wish everyone good luck. And I think I'm very glad that a lot of people are actually watching what goes on in Georgia, and
mhm.
I'm very grateful for this international solidarity, because this is what we need as a small country, not to disappear from the map.
Yes, that's really important. And to having people like you is very important to bring these topics to the discussion in a powerful and insightful way. Thank you very much, Esma. Thank you.
Yep.
Bye bye.
Bye
We'll
bye.
just
Have a good
see
one.
this a second. Yes.